Avec nous aujourd'hui, on a le ministre des Finances,
Today we have Mr. Morneau, Finance Minister, with us, and Minister of National Resources, Minister Carr, with us.
Statements and followed by questions. We have about 30 minutes altogether, and I will be very strict about one question, one follow-up. Mr. Morneau.
Bonjour, and thank you very much for being here this morning. As you've heard me say before, and as the Prime Minister has also said, the Trans Mountain Expansion Project is of vital interest to Canada and to Canadians. Our government's position is clear. It must be built, and it will be built. Getting the Trans Mountain Expansion Project built will preserve thousands of good, well-paying jobs, the kind of jobs that will strengthen and grow the middle class in our country. It will ensure that we're able to safely get Canadian oil resources to world markets where we can get a fair price for them. And it will reassure investors that Canada is a country that respects the rule of law and that gets big, important things done. It's important to remember, though, that Canada is also a place where we understand that the environment and the economy must go hand in hand. The Trans Mountain Expansion Project is no exception. Notre plan de protection des océans, les consultations avec les
Oceans Protection Plan, the extensive consultations with Indigenous communities, and the strengthened environmental standards and the rigors of the approvals process have all factored into our decision the government is announcing today.
Our world-leading Oceans Protection Plan, the extensive and ongoing consultations with Indigenous communities, the strengthened environmental standards, and the rigor of the approvals process, all of these factored into the decision our government's announcing today. So too did the understanding that division among provinces, such as the dispute that's arisen between Alberta and British Columbia, cannot be allowed to fester in our country, especially not when the resulting impasse threatens both the livelihood of thousands of workers and Canada's solid reputation as a good place to invest. So for the last few weeks, I've been in intense negotiations with Kinder Morgan, Trans Mountain's owner. These discussions became necessary when the political uncertainty caused by the NDP government in British Columbia made it difficult for the company to proceed with construction. The uncertainty caused unnecessary delays, put thousands of jobs at risk, including up to 9,000 jobs in British Columbia, and it's holding back Canada's economic growth. And this is all happening after the Trans Mountain Expansion Project was approved by both the federal government and the province of British Columbia, following the most rigorous process and environmental assessment in our country's history. So our message today is simple. When we're faced with an exceptional situation that puts jobs at risk, that puts our international reputation on the line, our government's prepared to take action. To guarantee the summer construction season for the workers who are counting on it, and to ensure the project is built to completion in a timely fashion, the federal government has reached an agreement with Kinder Morgan to purchase the existing Trans Mountain pipeline and the infrastructure related to the Trans Mountain Expansion Project. To
guarantee the summer construction season for the workers who are counting on it, and to ensure the project is built to completion in a timely fashion, the federal government has reached an agreement with Kinder Morgan to purchase the existing Trans Mountain pipeline and infrastructure related to the Trans Mountain Expansion Project.
Which is expected to close this August, was approved by Cabinet this morning, and is now subject to approval by Kinder Morgan shareholders. This $4.5 billion investment represents a fair price for Canadians and for shareholders of the company, and will allow the project to proceed under the ownership of a Crown corporation. The core assets required to build the Trans Mountain Expansion Project have significant commercial value, and this transaction represents a sound investment opportunity. That's why we chose not to provide a subsidy to Kinder Morgan, but rather to enter into a commercial agreement that will make the most of the economic potential of this project. It's an agreement that we believe will deliver a real return on investment for the benefit of British Columbians, Albertans, and all Canadians. It's not, however, the intention of the Government of Canada to be a long-term owner of the project. Canada will work with investors to transfer the project and related assets to a new owner or owners in a way that ensures that the project's construction and operation will proceed in a manner that protects the public interest. For Indigenous groups, we'll make sure that existing profit sharing or other agreements established with Kinder Morgan remain in effect. Many investors have already expressed interest in the project, including Indigenous groups, Canadian pension funds, and others. To facilitate the transfer of ownership, we'll extend the federal indemnity to protect any new owner from costs associated with politically motivated delays. The province of Alberta will also support the project, providing an emergency fund for any unforeseen costs, if needed. In return, Alberta will receive value commensurate with their contribution. We believe that this is the best way to protect thousands of good, well-paying jobs and the safest and most effective way to get our natural resources to world markets. Make no mistake, this is an investment in Canada's future. We
believe this is the best way to protect thousands of good, well-paying jobs and the safest and most effective way to get our natural resources to world markets. Make no mistake, this is an investment in Canada's future.
To investors who are considering Canada as a place to build big, important, transformational projects like the Trans Mountain expansion, we want you to know that you have a partner in Ottawa, one who not only respects the rule of law, but who understands the challenges that you're up against, and who work with you to find solutions that work for everyone. That's exactly what we did in this case, and as a result, the Trans Mountain expansion project will be built. Minister Carr will now say a few words to put this into the context of our overall efforts to ensure that we have a continuing strong economy and that the resource sector continues to play a strong role in that economy. Jim?
Thank you, Minister, and good morning, everyone. As you heard my colleagues say, the Trans Mountain expansion project is a crucial infrastructure project for Canada and for Canadians. Let us remind us how we arrived to where we are today. This project had to pass a high bar. Our government improved how we assess projects as soon as Canadians elected us. That move included opening the doors to public consultation, filling important scientific gaps, actually accounting for carbon pollution, and accomplishing the single deepest Indigenous engagement process in the history of Canada. This was no easy test, and we approved the project in the interests of Canadians subject to those improved and crucial standards and conditions, 157 conditions to be exact. We knew that to do energy differently in this country, we needed to act differently. The 157 conditions are in place to ensure we protect both communities and our waters. We launched the Pipeline Safety Act to ensure that all pipelines operate with world-class safety. And we co-developed with partners the Indigenous Advisory Monitoring Committee to ensure Indigenous leaders keep watch and advise on the projects throughout its life cycle. And we built Canada's Ocean Protection Plan to take action on the scientific recommendations on how to best manage shipping dilbit and how to restore and protect the iconic and brilliant species of our oceans. All this will be in place before the line is operational. And while the pipeline expansion has become a symbol of energy debate in Canada, it is also an example of how real change happens. Better science, real co-development with First Nations and Métis partners, a climate change plan, public participation, environmental protection. These are all values we will continue to build into Canada's energy decision-making. The previous government spent 10 years pitting the environment and the economy against each other. They pitted us against each other. It polarized us. That is not who we are. The majority of Canadians support this project. The majority of Canadians understand that we are in a transition to a clean growth century, and we will not get there overnight, but we will get there. We will get there by working together, creating the good jobs and livelihoods of our neighbors. We will get there by building the path together, a path that brings workers with us, brings jobs with us, and brings following generations with us. The conversations we have had as a country over the past few months have been about more than a pipeline. They have been about Canada's future and how we get there. And if there is one thing for sure we all agree on, it's the end goal: clean air, clean water, good jobs, and a better world for our kids. I can assure you that whether you wake in Alberta or British Columbia, or Newfoundland and Labrador, or Nunavut, you wake up wanting the same thing. Today, Canada's economy depends on the unrestricted flow of resources to market. For too long, we have relied on one trading partner for our oil and gas exports. In a changing global trade economy, it makes good sense for Canada to diversify our trading relationships as we diversify our economy. Canada is an energy leader in the world, and we will continue to be just that. The world is changing, and Canada will not be left behind. Canada has accelerated our clean technology leadership around the world. We have opened up offshore Canadian waters to wind and solar energy for the first time. We are pricing carbon pollution. We are launching a Just Transition Task Force to ensure workers help build this path forward with us. We are transforming our energy assessment system to ensure good projects get built the right way. Canadians have never accepted that we have to choose between a healthy planet and a strong economy. Canadians want both, and we can have both. It takes hard work. The path to a new energy vision for Canada is long, but we are well on our way. This project, moving forward, is about reliability, stability, and getting the best price for our resources, and most importantly, about good middle-class jobs for Canadians. Today is about providing Canadian families with certainty. No political interference should ever get in the way of that. The political dynamic these days is not the norm. We are facing unprecedented headwinds. I've said time and time again, pipeline politics are not always straightforward. There is not always consensus, even within political parties. When every corner of this country works together, you see how we can succeed. When we don't, you can see how we fail. To get there, we need to make big decisions that will get us from where we are today to where we want to be. And supporting this project is one of those big decisions. We will not lose sight of what is important. We will not lose sight of what this means for workers, for families, and for the future of Canadians. Now, more than ever, all of us must work to bring Canadians together for the common good that will last a generation and more. Let's move forward together. Thank you.
Okay, time for questions. I will, as I said, one question, one follow-up, and I will be very strict about it. David Lundgren, Reuters.
Well, good morning. How does this solve your other main problem, which is the opposition in BC? What are your plans to overcome the opposition to this project that the province is currently making?
We see that this project is in the national interest. We've been pretty clear about that to Canadians. We see that it provides strong economic benefits across the country, but significantly in British Columbia. We know that this is a federal jurisdiction because we have a situation here where resources are actually going across provincial barriers. This allows us to get rid of the political risk around that political uncertainty because we have federal jurisdiction over the project. That creates project certainty, and it allows us to realize the value that this project has for Canadians. That federal jurisdiction is actually what allows us to move forward.
I'm not sure I heard a direct answer. Is the plan to hold on to this expansion until perhaps there's a change in government in BC? I mean, you're now the proud owners of a new pipeline, but I don't see how you get the expansion built without sorting out BC.
we see the project in the federal jurisdiction, and that allows us to move forward with the project. We will, as we've said, consider how we move forward to move it back into the private sector. Our view is long-term that this project should be in the private sector. It has value, commercial value, for a private owner. In order to get it done, we need to deal with the political uncertainty, and the only way, in our estimation, that that can be done is through exerting our jurisdiction by purchasing the project.
Tonema Charles, Toronto Star.
Mr. Morneau, can you, I'm looking at your, what looks to be a sweeter indemnity promise here. So you're looking to basically say you're looking for more owners. You'll give them a guarantee, but what if you're also suggesting that you could take it back over if everything goes to hell in a handbasket in BC? So you're actually, what are you doing?
Let me step back. What we have here is risks and delays caused by political uncertainty. A private actor can't deal with that uncertainty between provinces. We're saying that in order to deal with that uncertainty, in order to assure that we actually get the value from this project that we know is there, we're exerting our federal jurisdiction by purchasing the project. Over the next stage, we are going to look to move this project back into the private sector. And to do that, we will need to consider what indemnity a private sector actor might need to move forward on the project. We haven't yet determined whether that will happen in the short term or the longer term, but we do believe that the appropriate way for us to do that is to create that indemnity that effectively assures federal jurisdiction for a private sector proponent of the project. I'll come back to the fact that we see this project as one that's in the national interest. We see the value it creates in terms of jobs. We see the significant economic value to the country. And in this exceptional situation where we have delays caused by politically motivated actors, we're going to take those issues off the table by exerting federal jurisdiction.
So you're buying everything, all in, the expansion, the new construction, the existing pipeline for $4.5 billion, a little bit more than half of what Kinder Morgan says it would cost to build the thing. How do you figure you're going to get the thing built for that?
What we're doing here is we are purchasing the assets. We're purchasing the existing pipeline and the investment in the twinning of that pipeline. And those assets are what's required for us to move forward with the expansion. That allows the construction season to start, as it's going to start this week, allowing workers to actually get the jobs, and it allows us to move forward with the investments required to get the expansion completed and delivering the value that we know it can deliver to the Canadian economy.
So it'll cost more to build than that, than 4.5 is what I understand. Am I correct?
Joyce Napier, CTV.
Will it cost more than $4.5 billion?
We are purchasing the assets, and that will allow us to continue the investments required to get this project built. We've done due diligence on the approach to doing that. Of course, a pipeline is effectively like an approach to move something along a toll. So it's effectively a user pay approach, meaning that the oil companies will pay. The investments that we made will be paid through the oil companies' payments to actually use the pipeline down the road. We're buying the assets so we can move forward on that project expansion, which is, as I said, will create the value for Canadians.
So, I mean, polls show that, a majority of Canadians are for the pipeline. Also show that a majority of Canadians did not necessarily want to buy the pipeline, which I guess we're doing today. How are you going to change people's minds? How are you going to make them happy about this?
We start, Joyce, by acknowledging that this is in the national interest. So we're looking at how we create 15,000 jobs across the country, how we ensure that an additional roughly $15 billion comes to the Canadian economy because we are able to sell our resources to international markets, getting a fair value for our resources. Of course, as Jim has mentioned, we do that in the context of an environmental plan that's best in class. What we are showing showing Canadians today is that we are getting value for money. The conditions that we set out in terms of the discussions with Kinder Morgan were clear. First and foremost, we said this project needed to get built because it's in the economic interests of Canadians. Second, we don't want delays, so we need the construction to go forward, the jobs to happen now. And third, importantly, it has to be a fair value for Canadians. It cannot be a subsidy to Kinder Morgan, so a fair value for their shareholders with no subsidy, and a fair value for Canadians in the purchase of the asset that, of course, has significant value for the long term, but more importantly for our economy.
Manon Connolly, Le Devoir.
Le Devoir, $4.5 billion. You said that clearly, but in your document, you say that you're going to indemnify any potential investor for their purchase, and there'll also be a legal decision in terms of federal jurisdiction. You said you talked about the rule of law, but since when do we indemnify companies for such deals? I'd like to say that we know that this project is in national interest. It's important to have a way of doing things, and that's what we're doing here. We're going to purchase the assets of the company for the pipeline and for the expansion project. That's very important. And of course, we believe that in the future there could be private sector involvement in the pipeline. That's very important. But for them, they have to consider the risks, political risks. So we are going to indemnify the company to make sure the project can be completed, taking account of the risks, and this is important for the federal government. We have to consider things in this way. We need economic advantages of this pipeline. The deal we're talking about here, it's an indemnification if the project is abandoned because of a court decision. But will there be a quick decision from the Supreme Court, or will we have to pay such an indemnification? For a private sector company, it will be very difficult if there's a jurisdictional issue. It is federal jurisdiction, so that's why we're going to indemnify them. That's our approach. In the beginning, it's clear we are going to purchase the assets for the Trans Mountain expansion project. That's important. And if there's a future approach with the private sector, we will indemnify them. And this way we can move ahead with the pipeline. Radio Canada. Mr. Morneau, what are you doing today? And demonstrations in Burnaby will also prevent the BC government from exerting its jurisdiction. We know that with our system, there will always be demonstrations because we have a democracy. That's important. It's very important to respect the rule of law. But at the same time, we also have to give citizens the opportunity to express themselves. What we would like here is a way to complete the project, and the problem with Kinder Morgan, for them, was the delays due to Premier Horgan's government, and this was the sticking point for them. But with federal jurisdiction, we know that we can have an approach that will deliver results that we are seeking. What do you tell Canadians today who voted for your party that was defending the environment and that now is purchasing a project for $7 billion that a previous government has never done it? They've never purchased a pipeline project in the past. It's very important to have an approach for the future that is comprehensive. This means we're going to have a carbon price, and we're going to have an approach that makes sure that people who produce carbon have to pay. That's very important to start. Secondly, our environmental approach is very rigorous. Our decision to have 1.5 billion to protect our oceans, this is also an important aspect of our approach. Yes, as Minister Carr said, we also have conditions. There are 157 conditions for the approval of this pipeline. And this is ongoing, so our approach is comprehensive. And we have to, we need the resources for our economy and for jobs, and also to make sure we are protecting our environment, and it'll be good in the long term. We always have to consider both aspects at the same time.
As I understand your statement, so far you're going to buy the physical assets of the existing pipeline and the expansion project, and not the entire Kinder Morgan Canadian subsidiary. So what management team is going to operate a pipeline and build the expansion? Who's going to be putting shovels in the ground?
This is an important question. One of our key conditions was to make sure that this project could go forward and to make sure that we actually get the jobs this summer and the long term that we expect to come from this. That requires us to have the capacity to complete the project, of course. In purchasing the assets, we've also agreed that we will take on the people that are integral to the actual completion of the project. That was an important part of our discussions with Kinder Morgan. That will allow us to move forward with an existing management team to deliver the results that we know are in the national interest.
So as I understand it, you're then taking on the Kinder Morgan Canada management team, and can I ask you what you left behind at Kinder Morgan Canada, since the market cap's about $5.7 billion and you're paying $4.5 billion? What didn't you buy from Kinder Morgan?
The assets that we purchased from Kinder Morgan are the existing pipeline, which has been in existence, as you know, from 1953, and all the terminals required to allow that pipeline to work, and the expansion that's been invested to twin the pipeline alongside that current pipeline, roughly tripling the capacity. Those are the assets that have been purchased. There are a number of assets that Kinder Morgan Canada has retained that are not integral to that pipeline. They do have other assets in their company that were not required. What I would like to assure Canadians is that we've come to a fair price, a price that assures that the value is appropriate, but also presents positive value as we get this pipeline completed for Canada and as we deal with this uncertainty in a way that assures we can get what we want to get, which is a project in the national interest completed.
Mia Rabson, Canadian Press.
The British Columbia government is not the only opposition that you're going to face for this. There's protesters that are planning to block the route, block construction. What's the government planning to do to address those concerns and address the protests themselves?
We right now know that the discussions will happen with both BC and Alberta. The Prime Minister is, as we speak, talking to Premier Notley and Premier Horgan. I expect that they will have something to say about this. Our approach will be to move forward to advance the cause of getting the pipeline done. We will recognize that Canadians have a right to express their point of view in a legal fashion, and that will continue to be an important part of our democracy.
How are you going to address people who are blocking the actual construction? What is the government planning to do? Are you going to go to court to get injunctions against them? What's the plan?
This isn't the first pipeline to be built in Canada. The pipeline will move forward in consideration of all the appropriate security constraints and the way to ensure that it gets done appropriately. What we What we know is that Canadians, as I think one person already mentioned this morning, are supportive of a project in the national interest. They're supportive of a project that creates thousands of jobs. They're supportive of a project that creates value both today and in the future to the Canadian economy. So we will continue to explain those advantages in the context of our environmental plan, which puts a price on carbon and recognizes that we need to protect our environment very carefully, which we are doing.
Michel Lamarche, TVA.
For some people, this is a risky plan. What will you tell people for various reasons who don't want us to spend 1 cent on this pipeline? And now you're deciding to spend $4.5 billion on it today. What I can tell them is that the project is very important for the national interests of our country. And we considered the value of the assets, and we're buying something. We're buying an asset that could add value in the future. And we have to exert federal jurisdiction to ensure that the value will be there in the future. So this is good for our economy, it's good for jobs, and the federal government is the only one that can ensure that the value will be there. Can you tell Canadians that there'll be a return on investment? And if so, how will you guarantee this? Because a lot of governments have failed with such projects that didn't pay off. Of course, this is an exceptional decision. This is a tricky situation between two provinces. But what I can say is that this is not the first time that we've had to consider federal jurisdiction in an important project in national interest. We invested in Hibernia, for example. We invested in General Motors. And there are other investments that were necessary. In our opinion, this investment has a lot of value, and we can add additional value for the economy and for all Canadians throughout the country. And that is why we decided to make this investment.
Katie Simpson, CBC.
Minister, have you had any conversations with any potential investors that are seriously interested in taking over this? And if so, which companies are investors?
I thought you might be asking me about NAFTA, given your files. What we've been focused on over the last month is working with Kinder Morgan to get to a conclusion that meets our goals. We were pretty clear with them from day one what our goals were, goals of getting this project done, goals of making sure that it actually creates the jobs that we know it can create, goals of getting the construction season going, because we know that to get the project completed, you need to start it. We have not been focused on trying to secure other investors. We've had expressions of interests from multiple investors over the course of this last month. Our focus, however, has been on the first step, which is assuring that we get a project done in the national interest. And the next step will be making sure that we have an approach that allows it to be in the private sector over the long term, as we think it should be.
Yesterday, I was speaking with Perrin Beattie, the head of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and he said not only would it be deeply, deeply embarrassing for the country if Kinder Morgan did not move forward with this project, he described it as something that would be reputation destroying. What are you going to do to try and ensure investors that Canada is a place where they can put their money and they can actually make money?
We're going to do what we've done this morning. We're going to say that in exceptional situations where to get a project done, we need to exert federal jurisdiction, we will. We're going to assure that when there's a project that provides significant value for the Canadian economy, significant number of jobs, we're going to assure that it can move forward. And we're going to do that both in a way that treats the shareholders fairly, as we did here, but also creates the value for the long term, as we see this project will.
Greg Quinn, Bloomberg.
These are all financial terms. The government had been talking about legislative options, and you're talking about asserting federal jurisdiction. Is there going to be any kind of legislation along those lines coming?
I think maybe Minister Carr might be more appropriate for that
There
question.
isn't any legislation that is required to help this deal. So there's not any one-off piece of legislation that's necessary. We're very confident that we are acting within federal jurisdiction, and the movement of natural resources across provincial boundaries has been proven time and time in the courts, including the Supreme Court of Canada, as squarely within federal jurisdiction. But we reserve the right as a government to look at other pieces of legislation going forward if we think that it's in the interests of moving ahead with this project and the assertion of the federal jurisdiction.
Secondly, I wonder, you must be aware of the example of Standing Rock in the United States, where protests became very protracted and tended towards violence. For people looking at Canada right now, you're talking about law and order. Are you concerned that we could get to that point?
The particular uncertainties and risks that we are seeking to assure don't delay the project were the political risks that were presented by the NDP government in British Columbia. Those were the risks that Kinder Morgan came to us with. We recognize that no private sector company can deal with friction between two governments. That's a federal issue that we need to resolve. There will always be challenges in getting things done in a democracy, and we've certainly been facing those challenges in many projects over many years, as have other countries. So we, in our country, will take the approach that recognizes that we need to consider the environment and the economy go hand in hand. We need to make sure that we are dealing with making people that pollute pay. So carbon pricing is really talking about how polluters pay, and at the same time, we need to respect the fact that people are concerned with our environment, as they should be, as we all are, all of us looking towards protecting our coastlines, which is why we've put in place our Oceans Protection Plan. At the same time, for Canadians, we know this project creates significant value. And so that is the approach we've taken. We think that Canadians understand that we need to look at those two aspects of governing our country in a way that creates the appropriate path going forward.
Althea Raj, Huffington Post.
I'm curious as to why you haven't acted earlier when the BC and the Greens got together and they said they would use every tool in their toolbox to stop this. Did you underestimate the threat, or were you giving assurances by the Horgan government that they would not pose a threat?
We, in moving forward today, are asserting federal jurisdiction because of the friction between provinces. We know that...
That's great, but that's not what I was...
Well, I'm getting there. That is something that only the federal government can deal with. That problem was presented to us on April 8th from Kinder Morgan. Our goal, as we've stated this morning, is to eventually see this project in the private sector. What Kinder Morgan presented to us was a private sector problem. They couldn't resolve something that happened between provinces. They couldn't resolve that jurisdictional issue. From April 8th to today, Althea, I can tell you we've been working pretty hard in making sure that we've come up with an approach that not only creates value for Canadians, which we think is critically important, that's fair for everyone involved in this situation, but assures that we can have a way moving forward that gets to the value that we want to realize from this pipeline for Canadians. This is an important, it's been a challenging discussion for us, because we know that we need to meet those goals simultaneously, the goals of getting the project done, the goals of a fair price that doesn't create a subsidy for a private sector actor and allows us with the ability to eventually move it back into the private sector.
I'm sorry, I was waiting for that point where you actually answered my question. But I'm
did answer
going
the
to
question.
rebut. You didn't, actually, not at all. This is only the purchase price. You must have a general sense of how much you're actually willing to invest to get the thing built. It would be irresponsible for the government to not have that. Can you be honest with the public and tell us what is that price? How much are you actually willing to invest from the federal government, from its agencies, from this new Crown Corporation to get this thing built?
The purchase that we've made, that we've moving forward with today, is a $4.5 billion purchase for the assets, the current existing pipeline and the additional assets. The The way that a pipeline works, I think, as you know, is that it creates effectively a toll, a user pay to be paid by the oil companies. So the additional investments will be dealt with in that way. And what we've also done is we've come to an agreement with Alberta that any extraordinary costs will be covered together. So our view is that what we've assured Canadians is that we can realize the value in this project. We can realize that value through the purchase of the assets, through the resulting pipeline that creates a price to be paid by oil companies and allows us to move this into the long-term value for the Canadian economy and jobs that we see are potentially able to be created here.
John Iveson, National Post.
You might have answered the first question. You certainly didn't answer our second question. Kinder Morgan put a price tag on the construction cost. What are the construction costs?
We, of course, did due diligence on this project. We've been working to do due diligence since we looked at the data from Kinder Morgan. What we first and foremost wanted to assure was that the purchase price of the assets was appropriate based on those assets and the value that can be created. And then we wanted to make sure that we had a way of making those costs for development that would actually be passed along to oil companies. That's the two parts of this. And finally, what we said is that in order to assure that we have some protection against costs going higher, we've worked together with Alberta to provide that assurance.
But there is a number which you know which you're not sharing. So what is the number, and what's it going to do to your deficit projections?
To be clear, John, this is a project that will not have a fiscal impact. So as you probably know, when you're making an investment, you're buying an asset, and that is something that goes effectively on the balance sheet. So there is no fiscal hit with this purchase.
What's the capital outlay?
James Munson, Bloomberg BNA.
That's the same question. I'm just wondering how you're going to ask for greater support for this pipeline from the communities that oppose it by not giving the full cost of what the government will invest in.
The approach we're taking is to purchase the assets and then to ensure that we have a way to move forward that will get this back into the private sector hands. That will allow us to ensure that the project goes forward in the private sector. So we created an approach to dealing with extraordinary costs with the Alberta government. Part of the due diligence, of course, was to look at construction costs. That was an important part of the due diligence, and we did that. And we looked also at what portion of those construction costs can be passed off to the oil companies in the form of tolls. What we are looking at now is how we can move forward in a way that assures that the value that we see there is there. There will also be a shareholder vote going on with Kinder Morgan, and we need to be clear of what we are able to communicate and what we're not able to communicate in the context of that shareholder vote.
So is the first part 4.5 plus whatever more personnel or investment that will eventually be paid off with the toll, will that come up to 7.5 or be above?
The goal in a project like this is to ensure that we actually create the value that we're trying to create. So the value that we're trying to create, of course, is to find a way to assure that the fair value that we've purchased it for, the $4.5 million, can be improved through the construction of the pipeline. We are confident that that can be done, and we're confident that can be done in a way that not only protects that value, but creates additional value through additional project certainty delivered by the federal government.
Paul Vieira, Wall Street Journal.
Do you have a target date as to when you want to sell this back to private investors?
We don't have a target date in doing that. I will tell you our most important target right now is to assure that construction starts. So we've got absolute assurance that construction season will move forward. And what we'll be looking at is the pros and cons of moving it back to the private sector in the near term or in the longer term. And those are considerations that we will make based on the kinds of expression of interest and the other issues that we face in assuring federal jurisdiction with this project.
Kinder Morgan said in the call that they're going to help the government till late July, help find a buyer. Does that mean you're looking to sell this? Can you talk about that arrangement? Are you looking to sell this by the end of the year, or what does that?
We did come to an agreement with Kinder Morgan that that they would enable us during the time period from the agreement today to the close to look at the potential of selling it to the private sector. That doesn't require us to do so. So what we will do is consider expressions of interest to do that, and dependent on whether that's appropriate at this time or whether it's more appropriate in the longer term based on what we find, we will consider those two timelines. To be clear, though, our goal is for this to be a private sector run pipeline in the long term, and what we have not yet ascertained is whether it's more appropriate to do that in the shorter term or the longer term without all the information.
Okay, Julie Van Dusen, I apologize because I think I missed you in the first flurry.
That's okay. What happens if no one wants to buy it?
We see this project as having value. This project creates value both in the broader economy, but also by purchasing it at a fair value, we allow ourselves to increase that value as the pipeline gets done. We don't see that as a likely outcome. We do know that in creating the value that we will be able to create that value under any ownership structure.
I mean, you can think that all you want, but people put things up for sale every day of the week and people don't buy them. So if we're stuck with this pipeline because no one wants to buy it, are we also stuck with cleaning up a spill if one should happen?
The asset has value. So the pipeline has been in existence since 1953. It's been creating value for the company during that time period. The expansion has value because it's tripling the capacity of the pipeline from 300 to 890 or so thousand barrels of oil. So there is value there. The question that you're asking is whether a private sector actor is going to purchase that value or not. We believe that a private sector actor will purchase that value. And we've also said that we are willing to look at indemnifying against political risks that are presented by provinces trying to delay that. Under any scenario, this purchase creates value for Canadians, and that is what we're moving forward on.
Julie, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir.
Le Devoir. In your press release, inaudible for the interpreter. Oh, a loan guarantee? A loan guarantee? We know that it's very important to start the project in coming days because of the time between now and the transfer of assets. Kinder Morgan has to start the construction season, and that means we have to guarantee their operations between now and the final date of the transfer of the asset. How much? We are examining what this guarantee will cost, but this is a cost guarantee for the cost of this construction season. Of course, question inaudible, we do have to have contracts with every individual who will be involved in the construction process. I don't know exactly how many people will be involved, 400 or 500. There will be not a very high guarantee level, but we do have to move forward with discussions to find what the exact amount will be for the construction season.
The next person on the list is Stephen Chase, Globe and Mail.
Mr. Morneau, is this so? Is it possible, or could you at least give taxpayers a sense of whether this could be a long-term hold for the federal government? I mean, would you compare it to Hibernia? The government saw the need to buy it in '93, and it took decades to make it really, for the value to shine through?
Our expectation, Stephen, is that this asset can be moved to the private sector in a reasonable time frame. We are obviously moving forward to get the project done, and that's most critical that we start it now. We would not expect it to be a long-term hold. We would expect it to be a short or medium-term hold for the government. We think that value can be created for Canadians in that time frame.
Do you have a follow-up? Stephen? No, okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for staying later than you had originally anticipated.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Help people better understand the issue. There is a technical briefing by departmental officials that will be following this. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.